following clip has been taken from our 2024 Australian Army Flying Museum video with presenter Scott Downs. Follow the link in the description for the full tour.
The Great War ends on, well, the armistice comes around on the 11th of the 11th, 1918, and the shooting stops. As we know, the war doesn't finish until 1921 when the actual treaty is signed. But the ceasefire happens in 1918. And it's a wonderful moment, obviously, for the world, because at this point, about 10 million people have died. The vast majority of them were soldiers, because it was a very finite conflict. But about 10 million people have been killed in this conflict, so it's a marvellous moment in sort of human history. As part of that, there is a peace dividend, and this happens basically every time any conflict finishes, and that's basically the government getting the money out of armies and navies and putting it back into the community, into schools and hospitals, where it belongs. As part of that, the AIF, the Australian Imperial Force, is disbanded in its entirety. So it was a completely volunteer force, hostilities only, and comes home, is demobilised and sent back to work, for want of a better term. As part of that, the AFC is disbanded. So after about 1918, there is no air element to the Australian Defence Force. As we know, after about 1916, not early in the war. Early in the war had been sold as a war for civilization against the Eastie Beasties, the Germans, the Hun, etc. That wasn't working as a propaganda tool by about 1916, and it was shifted to the war to end all wars. Fight this one and we're done. We won't fight anymore. It'll be over. So, and that's how people thought of it. It was the war to end all wars. They'd been sold it. So they had no problem with these massive armies being demobilised and sent home. The Australian Navy was reduced by about 90%. We'd done a great job. Our Navy had done a great job in the Great War, but it was reduced down. The ships were sent back to the Admiralty. The sailors were sent back into the community and into the merchant marine. The soldiers went back into their community, and like I said, the AFC is disbanded in its entirety. There is no air element. Within a few years, as we know, people realised they'd backed the wrong horse. There was going to be more conflicts. Luckily enough for Australia, a group of enthusiasts kept the pot boiling about, we need an air force, we need some sort of aviation element to our defence force. And in 1921, the Royal Australian Air Force was formed. From that point forward, Army and Navy in Australia fly nothing. All flying, no matter what sort of flying it was all done by the Royal Australian Air Force. The interbellum rolls through, and as we know, much to the despair of the Europeans, I suppose, the great European War of the 20th century kicks off again on the 3rd of September 1939. It's the same two teams, and they roll that out again. Between then and 1945, the Royal Australian Air Force does magnificent work. They fly in every theatre and in every campaign. We've just had the celebrations of 80 years since D-Day. Australia's the biggest by far contribution to that effort by Australia was Royal Australian Air Force. They are destroying U-boats in the North Atlantic while they're bombing the cities of Germany by night. They're shooting up Japanese convoys in the Bismarck Sea. They're defending Darwin in Spitfires. Les Knight throws the bomb out of the belly of his aircraft that breaks the Mona Dam on the Dam Busters raid, and so on and so forth. Like I said, magnificent work. However, there was a few things they didn't do particularly well. They didn't do light liaison, they didn't do light reconnaissance, and they didn't do what we call in the Army AIR-OP, or Airborne Observation Post artillery spotting, basically. Someone to look at where the artillery bombs are falling over the hill and where we need to move them to. They weren't good at it. They didn't understand it. There's no glory in it. It's not up there shooting down Messerschmitts and Zeros. It's basically working for the 17-year-old Year 10 educated kid with a rifle in his hands, and they weren't particularly interested in it. By 1943, Australian Army is agitating strongly to go with a model similar to both the US Army and the British Army by giving up their own independent air element to do that job on the battlefield. Our government basically says, well, look, we're right in the middle of defeating Nazi Germany and the Empire of the Sun. Can you get back to us in 5 years? Thinking the war would continue on. But as an interim, we will form number 16 and number 17 AIR-OP flight. It'll be staffed by RAF pilots, but the observers, the people looking out the window doing the work, for want of a better term, will be Army officers so that they can understand and tell and work the aircraft on the battlefield. The aircraft they're equipped with is the Oster Mark III. It's a development of an aircraft called the Taylor craft, which was an American company Taylorcraft were an American company. The British redeveloped that aircraft, put a larger engine in it, did a few other small modifications to it, and turned it into a light observation aircraft, a battlefield support aircraft. And it was capable of carrying up to 4 people inside it, looking out the windows, doing those things. It could also do immediate casevac, so you could pick up wounded soldiers off the battlefield, carry ammunition, light loads, but carry ammunition, carry water, and so forth and so on. But one of its great claims to fame is it was air portable. You could undo bolts, fold the wings down, and put it inside a Dakota, so a C-47 Dakota. We never used them like that in Australia. So in 1943, that kicks off. Those 2 flights kick off. They train through 43 and 44. They're up top in the islands, fighting against the Japanese, or getting ready to fight against the Japanese. And on the 1st of May 1945, they go ashore. Number 16 Air-OP goes ashore on Tarakan, in the first part of Operation Oboe, to take Borneo back. They go ashore at H+2. So you have the Saving Private Ryan at sort of H hour. 2 hours later. And how they get ashore is they are folded down like they're going to go into an aircraft, and then they're put on the back of army ducks. You've seen them in the movies, the floating trucks. They put them on the back of those, they balance them on there, and they drive them ashore. 2 hours after that, the wings are back on. They've been test flown, and they start flying missions off the beach at Tarakan within 200 metres of Japanese troops. It's an astonishingly good effort. The aircraft was really capable of that, and was a fantastic sort of asset to the soldiers then fighting the Japanese on Tarakan. For the next nearly 60 days, they fight on Tarakan. With that, we take the Army, not flying, we take our first flying casualty, so as a crewman, as a person on the aircraft, working on the aircraft, since the First World War. His name was Stanley Kett. He was an artillery officer, and he was killed on the 2nd of May, so D+1, when his aircraft hit a tussock of grass on that beach. Rolled up, caught fire, and he subsequently died of his wounds. He's buried in the number 5 cemetery on Tarakan, but he's the first army flyer to die since the First World War. So we're quite proud of Stanley. Stanley was a Chinese Australian, and his real name escapes me because I can't say it. I'm not going to embarrass him by that. But his second name, his family name was Arquette, so A-H-K-E-T in English. He had to change that because he wasn't allowed to enlist in the Australian Army as a Chinese. So yeah, things have changed a bit, but there it is. Things have changed a lot, but there it is. He was a Chinese Australian who had to change his name to be able to fight for his country. We keep using the Mark III Oster until the end of the war. The end of the war rolls around. Number 17 Air-OP flight, which had fought on Bougainville, is disbanded. Number 16 keeps rolling as an Air-OP flight in Canberra. And in 1948, the Army starts to train its own pilots. And the way we do that is we send people to England, they learn how to fly, they come back and they start to teach Army pilots in Australia. And they slowly start to replace the RAF pilots in 16 Air-OP flight. Through the 50s, we send pilots to Korea and they fly with English units in Korea, flying the Mark III. And we have another fatal casualty there, a guy called Joe Luscombe is killed in Korea. He's our second casualty. His name remains within our core. Joe Luscombe, the airfield in Vietnam that 161 flew at, was named Luscombe Field after him. When 161 came home from Vietnam, we brought the name of the airfield with us, and the airfield that the 6th Aviation Regiment operates out of in Sydney now is called Luscombe Field as well. So it sort of stayed with us. As we go forward through the 50s, we get the mid-50s, the aircraft's getting very old. It's a mid-30s design and we're still using it in the mid-50s, and it was a pretty finite aircraft by that point. By 1958, there's moves afoot to start the first dedicated Army aviation element, and the aircraft are being sought out. And at that point, the Oster is really starting to run out of steam. It's a very old design by then. But in 1960, in December of 1960, 16 Air-OP is officially disbanded, and immediately 16 ALA, or Army Light Aircraft Squadron, is formed in 1960, and it's formed using the Bell 47 Sioux and the Cessna 180, which I'll take you through now.
For more of this 2024 Australian Army Flying Museum tour with presenter Scott Downs, follow the link in the description.